Pests beware, your fields have heroes. The Pests and Predators podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and is powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. Visit fieldheroes.ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to this Wednesday, May 7th edition of RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and today's show proudly brought to you by Azotic Technologies. So big shout out to them. Head on over to azotic.com for more information. That's AZOTIC.com. We've got a great show lined up for you. I'm super excited. We had sort of a change of schedule this week. I wasn't originally going to be doing this show. I was going to be doing the Farmer Rapid Fire tomorrow, but you know what? All's well that ends well, and I'm happy to hop in so that Sean could get some of his travel figured out. He did have a very early start this morning out of Washington, heading points west. It was really neat, and Sean will, I'm sure, share more of this on Friday on the issues panel, more of the time he spent Monday and Tuesday in the U.S. Capitol, taking in the NAFB meeting there and just having some really fascinating conversations, of course, for Real Agriculture that you'll hear some of, but also just behind the scenes sort of discussions. And, you know, really in the face of Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump meeting yesterday, face to face, their first sit down meeting. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Sean has to say about sort of what the reaction was. I'm sure everyone has their own sort of opinion on how Carney did. And at the end of today's show, I am going to do a news segment. There's a couple key stories that we're following, but one of those is, of course, commentary on how the Prime Minister and the President's meeting actually went and what happens next. Also on today's show, it is Wednesday, of course, so we do have some markets to talk about. So in our first segment, I'll be joined by Ted Seifried with Zaner Ag Hedge. I've got some questions about corn, soybeans, and wheat because, let's face it, those are the big ones. And there's some kind of odd stuff been happening. So I'll ask Ted about all of that. We've also got, of course, a product spotlight with Azotic Technologies, our show sponsor of the day. So stick around. You'll hear from Scott Bishop in our third segment. Then we've got Devin Mogler with the National Oilseed Processors Association. That's NOPA. So Sean and Devin did sit down to talk about, you know, the state of biofuel regulations in the U.S. and how, of course, that impacts not just the U.S. market, but obviously the Canadian one as well, as Canadian canola and Canadian canola oil does, in fact, dovetail in quite nicely into the U.S. biofuel system. However, there's definitely some headwinds when it comes to the Make America Healthy Again, RFK Jr. Side of things, who is very vocal against the use of seed oils in the food system. And so Sean's got some great questions for Devin about, you know, how, as an industry, do you combat that? How do you manage? How do you navigate through it? And whether or not, and I think this is a really big question, is whether or not we see the U.S. and Canada, you know, planning their biofuel regulations sort of in tandem, where, you know, there's easy movement of product north and south and south and north. Certainly that has come into question in the last little while with not just the Trump administration. Of course, the Biden administration was in the sort of in the last days of the Biden administration, there was some significant questions over whether or not Canadian canola would be able to qualify in the U.S. for some very lucrative credits that, of course, the system works on. So lots to unpack there, so stick around. And then, as I mentioned, in the last segment, we'll cover off some news. We did get some news earlier today on the anti-dumping case that was levied against the U.S. here in Canada. We got a ruling on that, at least a preliminary one. We also, of course, I'll give you an update on Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservatives, running in Alberta. And we do have, of course, a new official leader of the opposition for however long. We don't know, but that's what we'll find out. So that and more, of course, in the last segment of today's show. So stick around. As always, we'd love your feedback. 1-855-776-6147. You can leave us a message. You can always zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. I really do appreciate hearing from all of you. We don't always agree. That's fine. Some of you have got some really great story ideas or people that you want to hear on the show. Or maybe you want to nominate your neighbor to be on the rapid fire. That happens every Thursday. So that's tomorrow's show. And we're open to all of it. Give us a call or find us, of course, across social media. And as I mentioned, and this is a really key part here, we do have a YouTube channel. We've had one forever and ever. And a lot of the audio that we do, all of our videos, all end up on YouTube. And so if you only really listen to Real Agriculture, either here on Rural Radio or on your podcast provider, there's lots more potentially that you want to see. That's on our YouTube channel. So check that out as well. And follow us while you're there. What do the kids say? Like and subscribe. There you go. Okay. We're going to take a quick break and I'll be back with more of Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM, brought to you by Azotic Technologies right after this.
Time for a product spotlight with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Joined right now by Rob Clayton, the Senior Vice President of North American Retail. Margins are tight in the cropping sector. It's one of those years where let's get to the other side of it. Live to fight another day, so to speak. You've also got some financial support services or products that you offer your customers as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really about being one partner and all in, as we say. We like to think of ourselves as the organisation that you come to for all of your farming needs, including the in-crop financing. And Nutrient's invested about $3.5 billion into a financing program for our growers so that they can get the products when they agronomically need them, not when their cash flow allows. It's a really important part of farming in North America, and particularly while we've got compressed crop prices.
If somebody wants more information, obviously in a lot of the local communities there is a Nutrient store, but are there other ways to reach out?
NutrientAgSolutions.com is a good way. There's lots of different ways you can contact our people, but really the best way, go into your local store, meet the local people and see what they got to offer.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM. Today's show brought to you by Azotic Technologies. All right, joining me now, it's Ted Seifried, Chief Market Strategist with Zaner Ag Hedge. Welcome here, Ted.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right. It's been a while. Hope you're doing well. I hear the markets are great, and so we can just end the segment there. Nothing. Or not. Okay. Or not. There's lots going on. Let's start with, Ted, if we can. Let's start with corn. It's the big one. Let's start there. What's going on?
Well, cattle's great. I'll say that. But
okay,
aside from that, yeah. No, corn has been under kind of a lot of pressure here, really in just the last week. And I think there's a lot of people really kind of scratching their heads on that because the contract that's really leading us lower is the July contract. And, a lot of people for the last a lot of analysts for the last 4 or 5 months have been talking about how strong our exports have been, how the USDA has been very slow to react on increasing exports on a WASDE report, therefore lowering old crop ending stocks. And by the way, we'll see their update on that on Monday. But, everybody's been kind of talking about how the old crop corn balance sheet could be getting pretty tight. And then go back to, mid-April, and we were just under $5 in July corn. Well, here today, we're at $4.52 3/4. So it's been a pretty epic slide. And a lot of that's happened just in the last 3 sessions. And July corn at one point had almost a 40-cent inverse premium, I should say, over the December contract, really kind of showing old crop corn tightness and optimism for, bigger acres and an easier situation for new crop. But then, that July corn really just kind of imploded. So it's suggesting that there might be more corn out there, or that our export program is going to completely fall on its face, and we're not going to export nearly as much corn for the rest of the marketing year between now and the end of August. Which, by the way, I mean, if you go back and look at last year's exports from this time to the end of the marketing year, they were really strong. So it's really kind of a slippery slope to compare this year versus last year, because it was kind of counter seasonal last year. Maybe the USDA feels like this is going to be more seasonality. Maybe the market's now just realizing that there isn't a whole lot of interest being out there in July and August, which I don't know if that's the case or not, to be honest. I think the most likely scenario is the USDA is potentially going to have to go back and change last year's production and increase it. Maybe they cut last year's corn production more aggressively than they should have. Although I would have thought we would have seen that on a quarterly grain stocks report by now. So I don't know. It's a very curious thing, because again, the big talking point for corn for the last few months is that, it's maybe the least affected grain commodity, or grains and oilseed, by the bigger tariffs, and specifically tariffs with China, because China doesn't do a whole lot of corn business with us on any normal year anyways. Right. So that kind of left people more optimistic about corn than other things. And then aside from that, exports have really been on fire, and the balance sheet has continued to come down and get tighter, and almost move to a position where you can actually say, hey, the old crop corn balance sheet is pretty tight. But then, corn's just kind of imploded. So something's afoot there. Something's happening. We can really kind of only make guesses at that for right now. But the easiest or obvious answer would be that production might have to be revised higher, and that there's just more corn out there, and the cash market is really weak. End users do not seem really interested in booking needs or additional needs out in July and August, or before harvest, really. And so that's just got a bad look for the corn chart, and the July contract has really fallen apart. Now, you can kind of tie that in and saying, hey, with a fast planting pace, it seems likely that we're going to get these bigger corn acres. It's always good to get planted early. That gives us good yield potential. So you could say that maybe the market doesn't feel a need to bring in as many old crop bushels into new crop for a beginning stocks cushion. But it feels like more than that. So, there's a lot of things going on. Weather is a big portion of that. The planting progress is a portion of that for sure. But it also feels like there's something going on in the cash market too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll keep an eye on that for sure. Now on to soybeans. A question there, not necessarily moving lower. Why not?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Soybeans have been, for the most part, in about a 30-cent range. Have been very sideways for the last month. And so, go back to the tariff announcements, specifically on China, when we went from 10% to another 10% to, now we're at 150, 125%, massive, and they responded. We had our 3-day breakout to the downside, and then 4 days later, we had taken it all back. And ever since then, we've been very sideways. And I think if you'd gone back a week before that huge ramp up in tariffs and said, China's going to have 125% tariffs on our soybean imports, but we're going to be pretty much unchanged in about 2 weeks. And I'm going to say, no, that's kind of crazy talk. Well, that's really what's happened. And part of the reason for that is because the amount of pressure that we've seen on the American dollar has really made soybeans competitive to the rest of the world outside of China. So we have seen our export program for soybeans kind of hang around. It's not been terribly robust, but we're still seeing some halfway decent numbers. And again, it's fueled by countries outside of not China, right? Mm-hmm. So that's been part of the reason. But the other part of the reason is that we already do have kind of a tighter balance sheet for soybeans, and looking at lower acres. I think the market does want to carry in some of those old crop bushels to just give us a weather cushion in case there's any issues like the longer term forecasts have been kind of hinting at, that we might have a warmer, drier pattern settling in for June, July, August, especially in the western half of the Corn Belt. So yeah, I think soybeans just feel like they're adequately priced for the time being. Now we've had a heavier day yesterday and kind of continuing on today. I think that kind of goes along with planting progress being very quick. And so I want everybody to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt too, because when we're talking about lower acres, right, and we're talking about percentages of a whole, well, if that whole is smaller, it's easier to make progress. And so the percentage can kind of make it look like, wow, we're planting more soybeans, faster than we ever had. Well, okay, kind of, but also we're not planting as many acres. So it's easier to get to 20, 30% in soybeans than if we were, say, trying to plant, 88 million acres of soybeans. So while it is true, it's just, the whole is smaller, so it's easier to get to that number. But the idea there is that if we are really rolling along on soybeans, at some point we might say, hey, let's just keep going. We have this tendency when weather is good and planting is going fast to continue on. And this year it seems like soybeans might get the benefit of that, partially because corn has broken as much as it has recently, partially because, if we're going to be planting extra acres, these are acres that we haven't done fall field prep on. Yeah. So the easiest thing would be soybeans. And again, if you're really rolling along on something, then, maybe there is some extra acres. So I think that's part of the reason why beans have come under pressure the last couple of days, but also spillover effect from the pressure that we've seen in the corn market.
Mm-hmm. Just quickly, when we're talking about soybeans to China versus other countries picking up soybeans, like what kind of numbers are we talking typically for the U.S. sending to China? Like how much of a gap are we trying to make up if China's not buying?
Right. Yeah. So, go back to trade war 1.0 or, phase one and all that. The talk was demand displacement. If China's going to try to buy everything from Brazil, that means Brazil's going to have less to sell other countries in the world, that we're going to see a lot of that demand displaced and get placed back on us. It's not as rosy of an outlook as it was, mainly because Brazil's producing more and the rest of the world's demand hasn't increased enough to really offset that. Let's just say this for 24-25, and I'm using 24-25 because we won't see 25-26 world numbers until Monday. Right. So we'll flip that script next week. But for 24-25, the world demand for soybean imports is 179 million metric tons. China is 109 million metric tons of that.
Okay.
So, the extra 70 million to go around, we already have a pretty big chunk of that business already. The extra isn't really there. So, if we don't get something going with China between now and the beginning of the next marketing year, we're already into our export program for next marketing year, and it's not good. Mm-hmm. We could see exports drop, I'm going to say 200 to 300 million bushels for next year, just for the loss of that Chinese business. So I am worried about that. But the market doesn't seem to be terribly concerned. The market, I think, is looking back to the first time we had this under Trump administration trade war, China, trade deal phase one trade deal. China ended up buying a fair amount of soybeans, right, as part of that trade deal, or trying to make good on that trade deal. And so I think the market thinks that's going to happen again. Trade wars are quick and easy to win, apparently. I get a different feel on this one. I really think that this is going to be a longer term deal with China particularly. So I'm worried that the market's way too optimistic about getting a resolution to this. But who knows? It's very unpredictable. Obviously, the Trump administration has been very unpredictable. And who knows what China really wants out of this. So, yeah, I don't know. It's tough to say. But my gut feeling is that this is going to be a lingering issue, and it could be a really big problem for our soybean export program for next year.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's end on a really great note, and we'll just talk cattle because I don't want to talk about wheat. But no, okay, fine. We'll talk about wheat Yay, cattle. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But no, we
Yay,
do need to talk about wheat. I saw a map earlier this week of the scab or the fusarium, risk for a lot of the wheat growing region, quite high. That's not good. Definitely talking about some weather risk for, the U.S., growing conditions right now. Where are we at with wheat? Is there any good news?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, there are still concerns about quality and also, weather. I mean, look, we were 45% good to excellent on our wheat crop. That has now come back up, right? And so that's been a little bit negative for the market. There's warnings coming out of China that, heat and dryness threatening their wheat crop. But at the same time, you've got Russia raising their exports. So that kind of raising their forecast. So that kind of offsets a little bit. I just think it's really difficult to get something really super friendly in wheat. And especially if there is some sort of resolution with Russia, Ukraine, and more Ukrainian bushels coming back on the market over time, that's just not really very positive. And I was just doing my numbers for the new crop balance sheet. And even though wheat acres are down, I'm still looking at an 800 plus million bushel carryover for new crop wheat. So it's just nothing to get terribly excited about so far in wheat, unless there is a really major weather issue. But you need to see those winter wheat ratings start dropping again, probably get below that 45% good to excellent before we can get terribly excited about it. That's just how it feels right now.
Okay. Well, that's not good news, Ted.
No.
But that's also not a surprise.
Yeah.
And, for those, we love wheat for all sorts of reasons, but it's not necessarily one that we very often get excited about on the price side.
Right.
So not a surprise. All right. Ted, I heard you're going to be very busy this week. On AgriTalk and other shows. So thank you for making time for me this week. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Absolute pleasure, Lizzie. Anytime. Thank you very much. And you have a great rest of your day.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Every successful harvest story begins with the right seed. And at Alliance Seed, we're committed to helping you achieve success every year. Our top-performing wheat, barley, oat, pea, and lentil varieties are tailored to meet the unique challenges of your farm, ensuring high yields, strong standability, and reliable disease resistance. Discover the Alliance difference at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern. Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and it's time for today's product spotlight with Azotic Technologies. Joining me now, we've got Scott Bishop. He's the National Sales Manager for Azotic Technologies. Welcome here, Scott.
Well, thank you, Lyndsey.
All right. It is, we are here early May. It's an exciting time, crop in the ground, looking forward to a big season. We hope the weather cooperates. One of the big questions, as always, is feeding that crop. Nitrogen's the big focus. Azotic Technologies offers Invita. So what is Invita? How does it fit into farmers' operations?
Invita is a naturally occurring bacteria that's able to capture nitrogen from the air and convert it to a usable form for the plant. Nitrogen is a triple bond in the atmosphere. And the only time we really take part or get the advantage of that is after a thunderstorm, because it reduces those bonds or breaks those bonds and makes it available to the plant. That's why it smells different after a thunderstorm. And that's why everything has kind of a green flush after a thunderstorm. What this bacteria, which was derived from sugarcane, is able to do is able to capture that N3 from the air and convert it to a usable form for the plant as the plant calls for nitrogen.
We're somewhat more used to, I think, the idea of nitrogen fixation with a pulse crop, let's say.
Exactly.
How is Envita unique then? How is it different?
Once Envita, the bacteria, the living bacteria, which is kind of a unique feature, but the fact that once it's in the plant, not only between the cells, but inside the cells at right where photosynthesis is taking place. So once you get Envita into that plant, it's going to replicate because it's a bacteria. It's going to spread from the roots. If you put it on in furrow, up through the plant to the newest growing point. If you put it on foliar, which is probably the majority of applications at this time, we're very unique. We're one of the very few bacteria that actually gets inside the plant cell at the heart of photosynthesis.
So then how does, as you mentioned, there is nitrogen, of course, in the environment, in the air, in the soil. How does Envita actually work as far as what sort of outcomes can producers expect when they use a product like Envita?
What you're going to see is, beyond the yield increase, you're going to see increased root mass when used on a pulse crop or a soybean, a legume crop. We're going to see, the original fear was it's going to affect nodulation. Actually, it does not affect nodulation, but it almost increases it because of the expanded roots under that plant. With corn, you're going to see additional brace roots. All crops, you're going to see a healthier plant because there's no stoppage of that plant growing. This is a product that's very effective during stressful periods, which in my 40 years of agriculture, it seems like there's never a lack of stressful periods in the growing of a crop. So if it's too wet, too dry, too hot, too whatever, that plant, as it demands nitrogen, is going to be able to capture it from the air and convert it into a usable form. Plant health is kind of a very broad statement, but you're going to have a healthier plant.
Now, Envita, of course, fits into the larger scope of biological products, as it's a bacteria,
Exactly.
as you mentioned.
No shortage of those.
No shortage of those, exactly. But, I mean, that also, of course, offers opportunity.
Exactly.
So what are some of those opportunities for farmers who are using products like Envita?
We're very proud of the fact that we are one of the very, very few living bacteria that actually gets inside the cell. There's a lot of noise competition out there with biostimulants that are based on amino acids and some other hormones for the plant. We are strictly a non-GMO. Our liquid formulation of Envita is a OMRI approved product. We're naturally occurring. We're derived from sugarcane back 30 years ago. Probably one of the most studied nitrogen fixation products out there. The numerous academic journals have done studies with Envita and published those studies. So we're very proud of the fact where we sit with this living bacteria, which is a food grade bacteria, completely safe, non-spore forming. So once the plant dies, the bacteria dies. So there's no persistence in the environment whatsoever.
Now, you did mention, of course, there is an in-furrow option, a foliar option. What are all the ways farmers can use this, and does it require special handling?
This is probably one of the easiest products to use. We can use it in furrow. I mean, it actually started out in the UK looking at it as a seed treatment. They saw some results, but not consistent results. From there, they went to an in-furrow treatment, seen much better results and felt like that was the way to commercialization. And from there, we saw much better results. But really, once we got into the foliar applications is where we saw the consistent usage of Envita and its positive effect on a crop. Wide window of application. Yeah, we can put it on in furrow. And usually when I talk about in furrow, it's more or less say, okay, what's your soil temperature when you plant? At the speed and rapid pace farmers can put a crop in the field now, there's always going to be some time where it might be a little bit too early, it might be too dry, it might be too whatever. This bacteria needs living tissue to intercept to get inside the plant. We don't want it in the 2x2. We always want it in the furrow, so it's close to that seed piece. But The trouble with the speed that farmers farm it these days is that if it's planted or applied at the wrong time, there's a heck of a lot of acres like that. We prefer an early foliage application, say like V6, V7, and we've seen results up to tassel in corn. Soybeans, we've got a lot of opportunities with the advent of fungicides going on with beans later in the season. Potatoes, a whole different story. You know, that seed piece is part of the tuber, so you got living tissue there. We've seen just consistently excellent results in potatoes and in trials with potatoes in furrow over that seed piece and then that tuber initiation. Okay. The big handling issue would be fairly simple, is the fact that we want it put in the tank last because it is in fact a living bacteria. And if that bacteria is not alive once it hits the plant, it's ineffective. So we put it in last, we spray the tank out. We don't put it in the tank the night before. When it's time to apply, we put it in. We have a liquid formulation and a dry formulation. The only little extra handling thing with the dry formulation is that we want it kind of pre-slurried, then put into the tank. Make sure we have plenty of water in the tank and spray it out.
Okay. So for those who are interested in Envita and learning more and how to use it, where can they go for more information?
To our website, Azotic.com.
Scott, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
You bet, Lyndsey. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
All right. We'll be back with more Real Ag Radio right after this.
Every farmer defines success differently, and every farm has its own unique challenges. Corteva Biologicals is partnering with Canadian farmers for their success, offering unique solutions that improve and protect crops from start to finish, based on each field's needs. Using proven predictable solutions across all crop stages, Corteva Biologicals helps build healthy, productive, and profitable farms. Corteva Biologicals, we're growing together.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
And welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and today's show, of course, brought to you by Azotic Technologies. All right, we hop now to, as I promised, Sean Haney was in Washington, D.C. this week, and he had a chance to catch up with just absolutely a gaggle of people and managed to sit in on the scrum with Rollins, Ag Secretary Rollins, as well as several other people. So we'll be posting, of course, most of that on our YouTube channel as well as RealAgriculture.com. So Sean caught up with Devin Mogler. He's with the National Oilseed Processors Association. I think is just so incredibly important for both the U.S. and Canadian oilseed industry, largely speaking about canola here, but soybean as well. And realistically, there are several trade issues coming from all sides, and some of those, most of those, domestically. So here's that conversation.
Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, and joined right now by Devin Mogler, who is the CEO of the National Oilseed Processors Association based out of Washington, D.C. Devin, how are we doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
We're hearing a lot right now. Maybe the number one issue, you tell me, but a lot of focus right now, what's happening with RFK Jr. and Make America Healthy Again, and what's happening with seed oils. I think we know your position on this matter. What are some of the things you're doing on it?
So we're trying to do what we can to help educate members of the administration as well as members of the public on the fact that there's a tremendous body of research showing that oil seeds are not only healthy but also nutritious. They've been used in our diets for almost a century. I know there's a push to make America, quote unquote, healthy again, and we believe we've got a role to play there. Oil seeds are heart healthy, particularly when you talk about something like canola. So we think the facts and the science are on our side, and we think that some of this anti-seed oils rhetoric is something of a bit of a food fad right now that's kind of caught wind online. We're not, taking any chances though. We're engaging with the administration. We're explaining to them how these oils are not only nutritious and safe, but also plentiful and affordable. One of the big reasons that President Trump was elected was because of high grocery store prices, high restaurant prices, and doing something radical like eliminating or limiting seed oil use would have a dramatic impact on the cost that consumers pay, not only for prepared foods, but also in the grocery store aisle and at restaurants.
Yeah, and I think if you were honest with Americans and you said, okay, we're not going to use U.S.-produced soybean oil, instead we're going to import a bunch of beef tallow from Brazil, they would probably be against that.
You would think so. And, look, if someone wants to fry their French fries in beef tallow as opposed to soybean oil or canola oil, that's fine. This should be about consumer choice. And we've actually heard RFK Jr. echo that same sentiment. When asked what, his problem is with seed oils, he typically just says they're included a lot in ultra-processed foods, and we don't like ultra-processed foods. So I don't know if it's a seed oils issue per se. Even when he was at a Steak and Shake doing a hit on how they are frying their fries in tallow, he's talked about how he just wants to, quote unquote, reward companies that make decisions to use alternatives, but he doesn't plan on banning anything. It's more about he just wants consumers to know what's in their food. And, like I said, we believe we've got a strong track record of safety and nutrition evidence and science backing us up.
So if that's, I'm assuming maybe that would be, so let's just say that's the number one issue. What's number two? Is it trade?
Well, trade is right up there. There's a lot, it seems like everything's a priority these days.
Yeah, no slow times at NOPA.
No, the biofuels policy is really what has driven the massive expansion in crushing in the U.S. Over $6 billion invested over the past 3 or 4 years to expand capacity by over 25%, and that's just on the soybean side, not counting all the soft seed crush expansions, driven very much by the RFS, the Renewable Fuel Standard, and we're working around the clock to try and get new volume obligations put out on that with the EPA. And we found some unusual bedfellows in this. We're working hand in glove with the American Petroleum Institute, which is big oil, along with everyone from the ethanol sector, the biodiesel and renewable diesel sector, us at NOPA and the American Soybean Association to ask for 5.25 billion gallons of biomass-based diesel in a 2026 renewable volume obligation. And it feels like we're pretty close to that. We've got a lot of alignment across the industry, and we can see those rules as soon as the end of this month.
Yeah, and when companies are thinking about investing hundreds of millions of dollars to expand crush capacity because of what's happening on the biofuels front, they want political certainty. And I think a lot of, I was talking to the RFA earlier, Jeff Cooper, and we were talking about how, the Trump administration is pro-biofuel, but that's at 100,000 feet. We need to get down to the 25,000 feet now.
Yep. I do think that it's been a bit of a sea change from the last Trump administration. I was out here working in the Senate and then on ethanol policy during Trump 1, and it was trench warfare between biofuels and big oil. Yeah. And since then, a lot of the major petroleum companies have invested not only in renewable diesel capacity, but also even in some crushing facilities. So they're a lot more integrated into this side of the supply chain, so we've got a lot more alignment when we're working on an issue like this. So us being able to go in as a group and all go to EPA and USDA and these other agencies, including the White House, and say, we're all aligned on our ask, it's refreshing to them because they remember some of the headaches they had to deal with this policy issue in the past. Not to say that we're entirely aligned on every issue, but it feels like we've certainly come a long way over the past 8 years.
Yeah, when I talk to pork producers or NCBA, we talk about the integrated supply chain and just how, the Canadian and the U.S. market are very complementary to each other. What about the crushing market? You would have a lot of common members between NOPA and COPA. How do the two sides work together?
We collaborate very closely on policy, including on trade policy, including on some of the low-carbon fuel standards that are out there. We're always comparing notes when California is looking at making changes, like they recently proposed to cap vegetable oil inclusion in biomass-based diesel at 20%, and requiring new sustainability and traceability guidelines. So we work with them on that. And when it comes to trade across the border, as you mentioned, it's very integrated, and we view that when we're talking about, supporting domestic feedstocks, what we really mean is North American or USMCA feedstocks. So when we're looking at a tax policy, we're okay with having canola oil from Canada coming in and qualifying for a fuel credit here in the U.S. We're more concerned about tallow from South America, or quote-unquote used cooking oil coming in from Asia that's displacing our homegrown feedstocks.
Yeah, because there was, in the last administration, in the Biden presidency, there was some talk about, there being a push for domestic feedstock only. And it had a lot of Western Canadian canola producers and crushers, I'm sure, very, very concerned. So you're looking more of a North American market?
We think that there's a middle ground there where we could, create a North American or USMCA kind of ring fence where all those feedstocks could qualify and help keep out the real problem actors, which is the folks who are dumping used cooking oil and tallow on both of our countries.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of your members that also access and utilize the CFR in Canada.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
We export a tremendous amount of renewable diesel and ethanol. I'm not on that side of the business anymore, but it's an incredibly important market. And I know on the ethanol side, they just exported 1.9 billion gallons, and I think over 600 million of that went to Canada. So very integrated supply chain, and we'd like to make sure that we can continue to see both meal and oil flow back and forth, as well as the fuels.
Yeah, I know you probably spend a big bulk of your time talking soybeans, but for a lot of farmers in the northern tier, North Dakota, obviously there's some canola acres as well, and trying to increase that acre. How does that factor into all these discussions?
Well, look, we want to see growth across the board. We represent not only soybean and canola, but safflower and flax, et cetera. So we want to see expansion of softseed as well as soybean crushing and canola. So we're supportive of all of it. We believe that getting the biofuels policy right is a rising tide that will lift all boats.
What do we do with all the meal?
That's a great question. I mean, my family feeds fair to finish hogs, and they certainly like the cheap meal prices, but it's putting pressure on margins. It's certainly helping our domestic livestock industry, but we need to find new markets. We need to expand some of those existing markets that we already have, particularly in Southeast Asia, that are taking a lot of their meal today from South America. And I think there may be an opportunity in some of these trade negotiations where they've kind of all been forced on us. There may be an opportunity to go to some of these countries and say, hey, if you're looking to help out your, trade surplus with the U.S., you could take some of this meal off our hands. That could be a starting point for negotiations as they're trying to, get their way around some of these tariffs that have been put in place.
Great stuff, Devin. Thanks a lot for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be back with more Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, brought to you by Azotic Technologies, right after this.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and today's show proudly brought to you by Azotic Technologies and their Fixing Solutions. All right, as promised, it is time for the top news of the day. And I think I'm going to start with just a general roundup of what the heck is happening with Canada's Parliament. Yes, we did, in fact, have our federal election April 28th. Mark Carney remains as Prime Minister. almost, very close, had a majority, but does not. There were, of course, several days of wrangling, of seats going back and forth. And now we've got our final tally and everybody's getting ready to head back to the House of Commons. So a few housekeeping items, and then we'll dive into some of the things that have been decided and maybe what's changed. And of course, we'll talk a bit about Carney and Trump meeting yesterday. But off the hop, Parliament is set to resume May 26th. So in about 2.5 weeks, we will have a sitting of Parliament, but it's really only a couple weeks. I think it's 4 weeks before they break for summer. So could you imagine that that's your job? You get a new job, 4 weeks, you get holidays. Anyway, I'm just kidding. I know that MPs do lots of things outside of the House of Commons, but I'm just putting it out there. Now, we did also hear that as of next week, so the week of the 12th, at some point, we should be getting the announcement of Prime Minister Carney's cabinet. Now, before the election, of course, he served as Prime Minister for about 9 days. He did name a cabinet, a quite small cabinet. I think it was 23 total, including Prime Minister Carney. The expectation, of course, is that it will be a larger cabinet, though the guess is around that 30 mark, and we will see who gets which position. For some of the ministers, it's assumed they will keep their roles, but frankly, who knows? There's all sorts of things that are up in the air. Now, of course, all of this is happening while we have this new relationship, a setting of a relationship between U.S. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney. They did meet yesterday in Washington, D.C. If you listen to Friday's show, the issues panel, Sean asked, what's a good meeting? What's a good outcome? And based on the analysis, there were definitely those, whether they were analysts, media, just politicers, who I think had incredibly high expectations of yesterday's meeting. And granted, there are some very concerned representatives of different organizations and commodities and companies within Canada that probably would have liked to see some sort of resolution on tariff issues. But let's face it, it was the first meeting. I think from watching how it went, most people would say that it went well. They were cordial with each other. They did have a working lunch after the meeting in front of reporters. Prime Minister Carney did, of course, challenge Trump on his rhetoric of the 51st state and Canada being for sale. But realistically, we didn't see any giant announcements coming out of this meeting, and I don't think we should be surprised by that. My hope was that it would go well as far as they would still be talking to each other or more open to talking to each other after this, and I think that's what we got. So certainly there is more critical analysis of the meeting. There are certainly those who think that, it just wasn't enough, and we'll have to see how it all shakes out. Certainly, I think at least, and we'll talk about this on the issues panel on Friday as well, the discussion of, either revamping CUSMA USMCA or reopening, it does seem to me like that's going to happen long before the 2026 timeline. So we'll see where that ends up. Now, one of the other things that we did get news of this week is, of course, during the election, at the outcome of our federal election, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and the candidate for my riding, did not win his seat. And so there were many questions of what happens. As we talked, he cannot serve as leader of the official opposition. He is still leader of the Conservative Party, but without a seat, he can't actually serve as leader of the official opposition. So we did get news yesterday that Andrew Scheer, who is formerly a leader of the Conservative Party, Andrew Scheer will serve as leader of the official opposition until such time that Pierre Poilievre wins a seat. Now, that is not a guarantee, of course, just because there will be a by-election, but we have heard, and as we reported on Friday, that Pierre Poilievre will be running in a by-election in Alberta. And when that will happen, though, is still up in the air. However, Prime Minister Mark Carney said there will be no politicking on this. He will call a by-election very quickly. So that being said, it still may take a little while. So the Conservatives did need to name a leader of the official opposition in the meantime, because, again, Parliament will start sitting in about 2 weeks. So we'll keep an eye on all that. We'll see how things go. I would like to just point out that the memes about all of this have been excellent. And my personal favorite is a spectator watching a race, a marathon, like a running race, held up a sign that said, "If you don't win today, don't worry, you can always run again in Alberta." There you go. Shifting gears a little bit to, of course, a few other news items happening out there in the world. We did get news this morning that the Canadian International Trade Tribunal had come to a preliminary determination of injury regarding renewable diesel and product coming into Canada from the U.S. So if you'll remember, in early March, so March 6th, the president of the Canada Border Services Agency initiated investigation into the alleged injurious dumping and subsidizing of the subject goods, those being renewable diesel or hydrogenation-derived renewable diesel, so also called HDRD. Essentially, the long and the short of it is there was an investigation into whether or not the U.S. was dumping renewable diesel into the Canadian market, and the tribunal says no, that the evidence does not disclose a reasonable indication that the dumping and subsidizing of the subject goods have caused injury or are threatening to cause injury to the Canadian market. So this is preliminary, but at the same time, they're essentially saying that they did not find evidence of dumping into the Canadian biodiesel market. So there you have it. There's that. A few other things, of course, on the docket today. We covered this on RealAgriculture.com. It's always a lot of fun to see new organizations be formed and move forward. And so for those of you who have ever grown hemp or are interested in hemp or eat those hemp hearts, we actually now have the first ever board for Hemp Canada Convert. So I think we're going with HCC. Is the term that we're going to go with. And the first board of directors was named, and some familiar names on there. So like you see with some other boards, of course, that are industry associations, there is provincial representation, and then they've also got importers and supply chain representation. So Will Van Rossel is going to be, he's from Alberta, he will be the chair, and Ruben Stone from here in Ontario is going to be vice chair. And I happen to know Ruben, so that is super cool. Rob Ardell out of Saskatchewan, Danny Lefevre out of Quebec, Antonio Bramonte out of Atlantic, Canada, and Adam Gregory out of Manitoba, Peter Dushup out of British Columbia will round out the board. And then we've got Mark Van Burk and Ryan Mead of Manitoba Harvest. The two of them will represent industry and supply chain on the board. So congratulations to Hemp Canada. Pretty cool to see a new board getting put together. And if you want to check that out, head on over to Real Agriculture. Just quickly, before I end today's show, and thank you for joining me, by the way. This has been a lot of fun. Great chats. I love it. I did want to touch on, there's coffee shop talk and there's rumor and there's et cetera. But because it's a markets day, I was checking out, some of the hog markets. Those are up a little bit. And I was looking at some of the cattle sales that have happened, and I had more than a few people from different provinces, and this is what I find is super cool. I had some questions about calves and what prices we're doing, and I have to tell you, anyone who's got calves being born right now, goodness, keep them safe, because they are worth their weight in gold, just about. So, hey, it's about time, and as we heard yesterday from Justin Funk, and as Ted alluded to today, some very good times in the cattle market. Here I am. Lambs should start arriving this weekend. Lamb prices are none too shabby as well, which is nice. But of course, for the seasonality, we will start pulling back on lamb prices here pretty quickly, or at least that's the expectation. So we'll see how it goes. All right. We'll end it there. I will be back on the issues panel on Friday. Hopefully, it will mean that the Leafs have lost, whatever games they have between now and then, and I can rub it in Calvin's face, but, we'll see how that goes. Go Jets and go Panthers. Let's put it that way. Okay. Yeah. Get on board, everybody. It's going to be a great time. All right. If you've got any feedback on today's show, you can give us a call, 1-855-776-6147. You can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or please give us a follow across social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right. Cheers, everybody. We'll talk to you Friday. And thank you to Azotic Technologies for sponsoring today's show.